Yeah, 12 years. It's hard to believe, and I wish I had more accomplished in 12 years as far as environmental progress. But I think we're making some strides, and we planted some seeds a long time ago that I hope will come up for blossom soon enough in the Kansas legislature. It's my honor to be before you. Thank you, Thad, and the First Presbyterian Church for having me. I think this is the second or maybe the third time I've done the Earth Care Forum series. And I like the name, first off, Earth, right? Reminds us that this is our home, that if you zoom out far enough, we're all neighbors and relatives on this little blue dot. But I also like care. It's not only a noun, but a verb. And so I think that's important that we have to practice care. We have to care and nurture this place called home. So thank you for that. I also want to thank those who are inspired, have big hearts in the first place, but are inspired to do right by our planet, right by our ecosystems, those that maybe sing a different song or talk a different language in our plant and animal friends and nature. That goes a long ways for me. I think we have the information to do right on environmentalism, right? We know the aquifer is being depleted. We know that the earth is warming. At this point, I think the more powerful forces for change comes inside this motivation, spiritual or otherwise, because we have to have a will to do something about it, to take it serious. So thank you for sharing that. I want to, I passed out a page because I told Thad, I said, hey, what happened to environmentalists being in front of so many screens all the time? It's like I spend more time behind the screen, whether it's a phone or the computer, than out enjoying the nature we're supposed to be protecting. Anyway, I have a little cheat sheet here to help you keep track of the bills and all that stuff. But I'd also just like to go into a little bit of Kansas legislature story time and talk about the issues we're supposed to, we have some opportunity for this year. And I'll ask our Senator Francisco, an environmental champion for years in the Kansas legislature, to chime in if there's anything I'm missing and all that, or commentary. And please ask questions if you have some, and I'll just go through some of the main issues. So the biggest environmental issue in Kansas that I talk up is, and you can think about it, but anybody want to take a guess? Okay, I heard plastics, I heard water, renewables, okay. Coal plants, okay. I tend to say the number one environmental issue in Kansas, even though they're all equally important, is water. It's just it's one that's had bipartisan support. If we run out of water, we don't have too much of any opportunity otherwise, right? We can kind of go without electricity for a little while, but we can't really go without water. And unfortunately, that's the prospect they're facing out there in communities in western Kansas, with a decade or two of water supply left in terms of their groundwater depletion, but also just recently down in south central, southeast Kansas and Caney, Kansas, had to cut school one day a week. Stop having public restrooms to try to conserve water there. And that's a little less of the issue there at the aquifer. That's a surface water dependent community, and they're just experiencing the drought and all that. So whether you're water quantity or water quality, and we talk quality with increasing amount of Kansas waters being called technically impaired, being polluted, nitrogen, nitrates because of agricultural runoff and fertilizers, our sedimentation of our reservoirs because too much of our soils being eroded into our reservoirs, and harmful algal blooms. When we have these essentially nutrient overload in our water bodies, mix a little magic of nature and warm temperatures, and those can create these toxic algae blooms that'll shut down lakes and create toxic water bodies. So we're experiencing more and more of those all the time too. And I promise I'm not going to be totally doom and gloom here, just setting the reality. We need to do more on water. Fortunately, we did get a bill passed this last year to increase funding for water. That's been nice. For a long time, we didn't have the full funding of our state water plan. And not only has the governor done that, past, I think this will be the third year in a row, but the legislature passed $35 million more in annual transfers to the state water plan fund. So that's good. We're finally putting our money where our mouth is, or where we should be dedicating our resources into water funding. Is it enough? A lot of people think it's not. What more can we do for water? Well, on our page, there's a few updates. KDHE wants to try to update the definition of their infrastructure as it relates to lead-free piping. And so that'll be, I think, a positive improvement to kind of get to federal regulations. But I got under here a state goal to save water, okay? I don't know if everyone's familiar, but about 85 to almost 90% of our water gets used by basically one industry in Kansas, irrigation, okay? And for a long time, and still, depending on where you're at, there's a lot of people say, hey, why should, the water problem and Western Kansas aquifer, High Plains Aquifer, the Ogallala Aquifer could be saved, right? If we just did one thing, had irrigators cut back on their irrigation, right? We're growing corn out in Western Kansas where they get, a foot, 15 inches of rain a year. And so we're subsidizing that by using, million-year-old groundwater in terms of the aquifer, okay? 85 to 90% of the water. So more than all the towns, cities, other businesses in Kansas combined by far. Okay, that's how much. So doing a different approach. Did a lot of finger pointing at the irrigators, right? And arguably, that's appropriate. I think a better approach is this: a statewide goal, where instead we're pointing the finger at irrigators, everybody points in the mirror or at themselves. And so if we have a statewide goal for everyone to help save water in the state, okay, then maybe we can encourage irrigators to do the same. So kind of a team effort where we're all in this together. Yeah, I've floated this idea past some of the Kansas, the chairman of the water committee and other stakeholders. They like the idea. Whether or not it gets enough traction to get passed is one thing, but no one's really said anything bad about it. And here's the inspiration. I was sitting down with the Farm Bureau lobbyist, okay, at the time. Sierra Club and Farm Bureau lobbyists sitting right next to each other in the committee. And I said, Kent, you've been thinking about water for a long time. What do you think about all this? And he said, hey, we should probably get on the same page, all be in the same goal, have a common goal. And I said, okay, I've heard of a goal before. Kansas passed a renewable energy goal for 20% by 2020 of renewables, right? Remember that? Anybody remember that? At the end of 2020, where'd we end up? 40% renewables by the end of 2020. Amazing. In 20 years, Kansas went from basically no wind to having more wind in the state to power the majority of our electricity, more than coal, in 20 years. So we could do that with solar and some other renewable energy strategies. But back to water, if we can just create a goal, just like those farmers in Northwest Kansas came up with a goal that they try to save 20% water over 5 years' time, they're closer to 30% now. And important, a little footnote on that, they actually made just as much money, if not more. They were profitable, even saving 20% water. So I'm saying that's an inspiration. And so why don't we all take inspiration for that and try to do a state goal? So that's my little legislative. Besides funding, what more can we do to try to help the state save water? And that's one of the ideas I've been floating around. No bill number on that, but working on it. Let's go up to land because we got a real immediate need and something that concerns Lawrence specifically. I heard plastic bags, okay? We're back at it. The legislature is trying to restrict home rule on plastic pollution is what I call it. It's a preemption where the state government will say no county or city in Kansas can restrict plastics, okay? Plastic containers. Plastic bag, plastic bottles, plastic straws, that sort of thing. Foam clamshells, you get takeout. And so that's a bill backed by the Kansas Chamber of Commerce. The businesses saying, hey, we don't want like City of Lawrence creating a problem for Walmart and other businesses to where now all of a sudden they can't give out plastic bags freely at their stores, okay? My joke is we've faced this, I think, 4 years in a row, maybe 5th year. We're recycling the piece of legislation more than we are the actual bags, right? And it's just unfair in multiple different ways, right? We know from the environment standpoint that plastics end up in our waterways. We got ocean full of plastic now. Let's say scientists think we'll have more plastic by weight than fish in the near future, few decades. Can you believe that? More plastic in the ocean than fish. Unbelievable. And it's all just single, easy, one-use disposable plastic bags for the most, or not plastic bags only, but bottles, nanoplastics, etc. All part of this plastic society we increasingly face ourselves with. Lawrence wants to do something about it, right? It was lettuce. Right, the Lawrence faith-based environmental team, 4th grade class, right, the Sustainability Advisory Board and Sustainability Action Network here in Lawrence got that passed after multiple years of trying to convince City Council. They just passed it, right? It's supposed to go into effect, what, this year? March, okay. And I know that there's an educational campaign to try to do something about it along the way, too. Well, folks from other communities in Topeka want to try to take that right away. Not only is the city's right to self-govern in the spirit and the letter of the Kansas Constitution, I'm arguing, we got a hearing on Tuesday, it's against the Kansas Republican Party platform, where they say local control should be preferred. Okay? Besides all that, Wichita, when they were thinking about doing the restriction on plastic bags, they identified that half of the trash, the litter out there, was either plastic or foam. And 3/4 of, and this is anything over 4 inches of litter out there, according to their study. And 75% of it was food packaging. Okay? So it's clearly an identified piece of pollution out there. And yet the legislature, backed by the Kansas Chamber, wants to try to get that right of cities revoked. And I'll say this, they weren't successful. They haven't been successful, right? They didn't even get it out of committee on the Senate side last year. So they switched it in a different committee. It'll be the Senate Federal and State Affairs Committee. Happens to be Chairman Mike Thompson. You might have heard of him. He's a climate denier. Weatherman, Fox 4 weatherman. Mike Thompson, calm during the storm. A little too calm if you ask me. But I would just say that I think he's here giving the bill a hearing. We'll see how it passes the test for a committee. But if there's anyone around that committee, Republican or Democrat, thinks we ought to be governed by little government, little g, local, versus big government taking away that right, I think we'll have some opportunity to make that claim and try to get the bill. If not, Governor Kelly, she'd give us a veto on it last time, increases the threshold to pass this bill. We'll ask for that veto if it does get passed. That's House Bill 2446. Any questions on what I've said thus far on those? Can you believe that? Lawrence is actually trying to do something positive for the environment, and legislators feel, and business community specifically, feel like they ought to take that right away. It's just unbelievable if you ask me. There's another bill, top one there, 2541, funding for conservation. So I said we passed a bill for funding for water. We're talking about funding conservation efforts. That's great. $63 million of state dedicated funding to conservation. Cover crops, environmentally sound practices on agriculture would get about half of that $63 million. A quarter of it would go to wildlife and habitat programs, and then a quarter of it would go to parks and recreation, green spaces. That'd be pretty good. Okay, where's the money coming from though? Well, we're doing a slice of the lottery prize money. Okay, so the lottery won't get as big as fast, right? Because we're slicing a little of the prize money off. Also, some of the sports gambling revenue, just past sports gambling not too long ago, and then also collecting a fee, existing of the fee collection on sporting goods equipment. So what do people think about that? Dedicated funding for soil conservation and land, I think is good because we know we can't save the land. To save the water, we got to help save the land and preserve our healthy soils. Let the water get down into the soil and all that stuff, decrease the runoff and erosion. But the same, if we want to improve water quality, we need to, I guess I already said that. Yeah, we have to save the soils and vice versa. So anyway, that should be pretty exciting. There's a lobby day on Monday. Anybody come to the Capitol on Monday to be involved with all that? Okay, great. Thanks for coming. That'll get a hearing tomorrow in House Agriculture and Natural Resources, and it's got about 40 different organizations that support it, including some of the big farm organizations in the state, environmental organizations, the Corn Commission, for example. So I think it'll have enough support if we can keep some of those folks that are concerned about big government kind of conspiracy land grab, like conservation programs as a way for the government to steal your land. I think you ask most farmers that have been involved with that, conservation reserve program, et cetera, they don't feel that way, right? This is trying to help better practices on the land. I think most people get it. Okay, so that's really exciting. Speaking of that kind of land grab kind of mentality, there was this bill that was introduced, 2476, that said any national heritage area or historic trail would have to have legislative approval before any funding could be identified for that. So that's really interesting. Kansas got some historic trails, right? Santa Fe Trail, et cetera. So, okay, I'm going to switch over to energy, but any questions, thoughts, advice on any of that land or water issues? Okay, ready for energy? Okay. So, two big ones. Kansas is one of the top states for the sun, believe it or not. 10th sunniest, I think, of the solar resource of all states. Just as much sun as Florida. Unfortunately, not the same beaches, right? But we're number 44, bottom 10 in solar energy. So how does that square? Top 10 state for the sun, bottom 10 state for solar energy. We got to fix that. That's untapped potential. Just like we've done with the wind in 20 years, we could be doing the same with solar, and not just large solar farms out there, which we definitely need to help with the climate issue, but we should also incentivize them, putting them on, or at least eliminate the regulation and red tape to put them on the rooftops. Okay? So there's a few bills I have on here that would help solar, one of which a Sierra Club helped write was allowing for solar in homeowners associations. Anyone here in a homeowners association? Okay. They allow solar, do you know, in your neighborhood?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Interesting.
That might be possible.
Okay. You haven't seen any?
I'm not aware of anything.
Okay. Well, I got a friend in Olathe who reached out to us and was kind of the motivation behind this bill. He put them up on his, the family put them up on the roof. HOA came by, told them they had to take them down. They're sitting in his garage. Can't catch very much sunlight in the garage.
Why?
Just per the covenant, didn't allow solar. Well, it's kind of like I think back when they started writing these things, they were like a big satellite dish. You know what I mean? We had those big satellite dishes, and now you can just stream. You don't even need an actual satellite for some of that stuff. It's come a long way, and so you still have some of those outdated provisions on the books. They haven't changed them, but it's all about aesthetics, is what I'd say. And you even have some that's talked to a couple in Wichita. You can't have them on the front of your house where the solar is. If you have a south-facing front, they don't want them there. You can put them on the back side. Yeah, where they don't do any good. So anyway, I got a Republican, Adam Thomas, out of Olathe worked with. He considers HOAs the fourth branch of government, is what he told me. And again, we're trying to cut the red tape on renewables to try to allow some people. And the person that's got the solar panels in the garage, they said, "Hey, I just want to be able to control my bill a little bit. I got a monopoly utility that seems like prices are going up and up, and he said, I'm a self-identified Republican. I just want to do this for my own household energy costs." And I said, "Hey, I don't blame you at all. Let's try to get this bill passed so you can put it back on your house." So 2268, would love to have a hearing on that. It's in House Local Government right now. I'm working with the chairman and try to get a hearing in the next couple of weeks. But to improve solar more generally, there's an upcoming bill to improve the value you can get from solar in terms of, it's called net metering, selling your excess power back to the utility and the grid. We want a better value for that, but also there's some restrictions on the size of array that you can have on your rooftop, or whether it's a home or a business. And depending on how much of the solar makes up the peak demand, how much power we're using at the very high end of the demand, we need to expand that because we're running up against that little limit, which is a 1% solar of peak demand in the Kansas City metro area for Evergy. We're getting up to where we have more and more solar to where that we're going to hit that cap. So I know that's a little technical, but we got to expand that cap and that size limit. And so there's a forthcoming bill, is my understanding, to allow for that. And that would be, that's likely to get a bill number in the next couple of days.
I don't know if you know, we have a group who's been working hard to get solar here.
Oh, okay.
So
great.
This has helped because we do have a group who's we're looking now, probably at doing a carport
oh, yeah.
on this side to do. So
great.
We'll begin conversations with the congregation next month. But
okay.
The group has been working very hard on that.
Very good. Well, I know, and this isn't the only church around the state trying to do that same thing. It's because it's, good use of natural resources, God's given abundance as far as our warmth and light, etc. There's another bill, House Bill 2227, which would provide for community solar and third-party power purchase agreements, which would mean you wouldn't have to necessarily go through your utility to make an arrangement for you to provide that solar, right? Right now, if your utility says no, you can't put solar on the carport and provide your power to us. There's some restrictions on that because anybody who puts solar power up there would be classified as a utility. So it would allow kind of third parties, like if, let's say, the Walmart in town wanted to have its own little solar array and generates its own power off grid. If you're still hooked up to the grid, there's certain restrictions about that. So that community solar third power party purchase agreements would be really good. And especially for a big factory, electric vehicle battery factory like Panasonic. They're going to have a huge amount of energy need. And if they could get half of it from a solar farm next door and then half of it from the grid, that might help everybody else's bill as far as rate impacts being spread out. So we're talking to them about that. There's some technical issues there with manufacturing requiring a different kind of high temperature power, but we're trying to work through some of that. At least they should have the option, is what I'm trying to say. There's some other bills that would be good for kind of consumer protection, low income rate. So people that can that lower income people can at least afford a bill so other people don't have to pick up the tab through a discounted rate. Sierra Club helped push a bill for utility data transparency by zip code, meaning we want to know how many electric customers get shut off, involuntary disconnected. And we want to know by zip code so we can focus community assistance efforts from the state or otherwise, private assistance, to those areas to help those people in need. We don't need to know their name or household. We just need to know the general zip code, but utility's been reluctant to provide that data. So unfortunately, we got to ask for it through legislation. Other thoughts, questions on energy? I know that was a lot. There's a lot there, but Senator.
Help me work on requiring the credits for home builders to include energy efficiency requirements.
Oh.
In Lawrence, we have a really great building code now.
Yeah.
But that isn't throughout the state. And the state recognizes housing as an issue, so we're putting money there. And tomorrow is the last day to request a bill, and I'm thinking about requesting a bill to say, I don't think we get a state building code this year. But I think if we just say the state money that we're spending has to meet a certain building code.
Oh, I like that. That's great. And I'm glad you brought that energy. Energy we save is the best form, cheapest form of energy, right? Because we don't have to generate it. It's the most green form of energy. We have a new senator chair in Senate Utilities Committee, Michael Fagg out of El Dorado, Kansas, and he cares deeply about the energy efficiency. We're second to last among states in terms of energy conservation, and he thinks that should be fixed. So, Senator, would love to work with you on that. I think that's a great idea. We got to make up a lot of ground to try to help people save energy, and that'll help rates out too, I think, in the long run. Okay, I want to make sure we have time for questions and advice for Zach, etc. But let's do a few more here. I got under agriculture. Department of Agriculture wants to update the Pesticide Act, which is good, to be more in line with kind of federal requirements. That would be good. I don't see that as a controversial bill. There's no bill number yet, but there's a Kansas Food to Farm Bank program, or Farm to Food Bank program. So trying to get more of our farm foods locally grown here in the state to the food banks. It's nutritious, it's local, helps the farmers. Governor Kelly put $1 million in the budget for that program, but there's also been a bill introduced. Sierra Club is trying to help some farmers out in northwestern Kansas that have been unfairly treated by their neighbors in terms of swine wastewater. Application of wastewater on their field right next to their property. It's driven them outside their house. It's a really awful story. This is coming from a kid who grew up on a pig farm. So there should be some restrictions on how close you can spray to people's residences on the incline during different types of weather, etc. Transportation. There's an interesting initiative going on, and actually the Department of the Federal Railroad Administration or something like that identified a new passenger rail line from Newton down to Oklahoma City as a priority project. And so this bill is complementary to that to provide some transfer of annual funds into that passenger rail service program, $5 million a year. But that Heartland Flyer extension, pretty exciting. Go from Newton down to Oklahoma City. And we know here in Lawrence, you can go from Lawrence down to Newton, right? And then so you can go Lawrence to Newton, and then Newton down to Oklahoma City if you want. So that's pretty good. Obviously, passenger rail is good for the environment versus more cars on the road.
Will that gradually be extended further than Oklahoma City?
So Oklahoma City's already got an existing line that goes down to Fort Worth. Yes. Yep. Good question. And then, anybody got an electric vehicle here? Okay, Senator. Well, you're aware that once in a while the legislature thinks we're going to run out of money for the the highways if we get too many electric vehicles out there, right? And I got a long-winded response to that, but I'll just say if you want to look at really who's damaging the roads and who should help pay for the roads, it's probably the big trucks, right? Do a lot more damage than the electric vehicles. There's not very many electric vehicles right now taken away from state funds. And by the way, what about all the pollution? So. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pause there and do, yes.
You did know that annually, if you have an electric vehicle, you pay a charge.
That's right.
As part of vehicle registration.
Right.
So, and that's not specifically tied to how many miles, but it's a average. So overall, the electric vehicle should be contributing the same amount as people do through their gas tax.
That's right. That's right. But we collected at the registration side of things. That's absolutely right. This was the initiative was to try to capture out-of-state drivers coming through Kansas, charge them at the charging station. That makes sense, but you can't have both. That's like double tax in Kansas with electric vehicles, if you ask me. Okay, that's the end of the formal presentation. Thank you for being a very polite audience and allow me to talk about some of this fairly fast with you. But questions, thoughts, and we can talk more about other dynamics with the legislature and all that.
Yeah, I don't know how open do you see the Farm Bureau, livestock associations dealing with the urgency of climate change? Is there beginning to be more of an openness to having the kinds of conversations that are needed to be with these groups?
I think so, and I'll tell you why. What was it, 2 years ago? 2 years ago when we had the extreme heat and the wildfires, and I don't know if any of you saw it. I just saw about 10 seconds and I had to turn it off of the animals being burned up in the fields because of the wildfire. There were two separate ones. Kansas had its two biggest wildfires in back-to-back years. I think it was 2016 and 2017. But just recently, a couple of years ago, we had a bad fire where there were several cattle that were lost, got burned up by the fire, and then also the extreme heat. Triple digits heat temperatures for too long. Out in those feedlots, there's no trees. There's barely any grass on the ground anymore. They just overheat and die. And so we've had enough of those instances where I think there is an understanding. Oh, we do need to think about our trend here in the climate and our vulnerability. So again, I don't know if it's totally acknowledging climate change and what we need to do of it in terms of energy or land management practices, etc. I think there is an understanding. It's like, oh, we're literally getting burnt on this stuff with the extreme weather, and so I think there's a little reluctance. Certainly there's no climate denial happening that I've experienced by either of those organizations, which is good. I don't know if I would have said that, a decade ago. So what can we do about it? I mean, I think we got to continue to press for, I think the sentiment's there. Now we got to have some policy prescriptions. And what does that mean? That's a little tougher. But they've been supportive of the conservation funding too, and that'll help some of that. Yeah.
Back on the passenger rail, I'm not sure what the situation is in Kansas and Oklahoma, but I know when I've done the Missouri River Runner,
yeah,
the tracks are owned, I understand, by the freight trains.
Yes.
I had two horrible experiences.
Oh no, delays and all that.
Yeah. But I'm excited about this, the proponent of passenger rail. So I'm curious, is this taking into consideration will passenger rail get priority over freight train traffic with all the movement here?
Unfortunately, no, my understanding. But with the increased ridership, with understanding, they're trying to make it more fair agreements and all that stuff. But a lot of times the freight still gets priority on their lines. And this is their, I don't know if it's BNSF has the line there.
Yeah.
Got it.
Been delayed several times.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what will it take to fix that?
Well,
Is it-
Part of that's Amtrak. They're operating equipment that's 20 or 30 years
Yeah.
old, and even having been refurbished, it's wearing out. Just ordered a whole new, they just submitted proposals to replace that.
for upgrades of the actual
That's
train.
behind some of it.
Yeah.
That's the freight trains too.
The freight is still seen as supply line.
Right.
So it's gonna be commercial, it supports the economy.
Right.
I grew up a mile from the train track and they have double the size of the train, the freight trains, because they don't have enough staff
Oh, sure.
to staff the engines, and that's why you see them blocking roadways.
Oh, yeah.
off the track for miles and miles.
They had plenty of staff, but it's a cost cutting.
Yeah. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is when Amtrak is using a rail line that BNSF built, that's why they're secondary on all that. Yeah.
And it's not in very good shape either.
Yeah.
No.
Well, I mean, I would say that this is exciting and there's been more interest. I mean, this is kind of bipartisan support there for this rail line here in Kansas. And so that's pretty good. So,
When you say
Dave.
bipartisan support, when they announced in the paper about passing that, they were going to fund it.
yeah.
Senator Moran, they quoted Senator Moran, said, "Oh, I'm so glad that it passed. I mean, it's so glad that we're getting money for it."
Yeah.
And yet, it pointed out later in an article that Senator Moran voted against that bill in Congress to have the money for that.
Oh, no.
How cynical he takes it.
Yeah.
Down.
Well,
That's the way the senator.
that's a problem. That's a problem.
They take pride from something happening, but they voted against it in the first place.
Yeah, good point. That's a problem. I hope we can avoid that here in Kansas where all the bills are bundled together for a little bittersweet, a package or whatever. The more we can continue to vote up and down on singular subjects, the less likely that is to happen because things aren't totally bundled together. And I should just say, I'm sure many of you know, and while it's not necessarily in my mind earth care, but we do have an issue where this is really hot and heavy this year in the legislature, where we had the tax committee meet in the first week, tax conference committee. They want to try to get a budget by March 1st, and all that's just to try to get things happening really quick so they can get out of there and start campaigning is my little thought on all that. Maybe they're just trying to get things done versus in daytime versus late at night. That's a positive, but just my little editorial there.
Going
Yeah.
back to water, I know the Quivira refuge was out of water this year, they had nothing left for.
Right.
And that's such a vital stopover, and the federal government has first water rights up
Yeah.
there. So.
Yeah, this is Quivira senior water right. Senior water right. And I'm saying, well, wait a second. Last time I checked, ecosystems had the most senior water right. Default, Yeah. And I know, so that's been a point of contention. And by the law, if you're first in time, first in right, you got a senior right, then Quivira, the chief engineer, could potentially shut down those junior water right holders, irrigators around Quivira, and force the law so Quivira gets its amount. Now, politically, that's really dicey, and that's why you saw not just U.S. senators chime in on that, but Governor Kelly saying, hey, we'd like to resolve this more peacefully than to just enforce the water right, even though that's the letter of the law. Sierra Club sent a letter to the governor saying, hey, you're the chief executive, you need to enforce the law. But then there's been some compromise to try to negotiate and all that stuff. That's a really tough situation, and if we can figure out how to resolve that situation, my main, this whole idea of water rights, first in time, first in right, is kind of tough anyway, because then we start prioritizing certain water uses more than others, even when some are base or fundamental, right? Why is it that domestic water rights, drinking for your household or drinking for the community in terms of towns, water use, municipal rights, comes secondary to irrigation rights and for private gain, for watering crops? That probably shouldn't be, utilizing those types of crops there in the first place, right? So you know, but so I talk about prioritizing the beneficial uses of water, and then people say, well, we've already over allocated all these water rights, and we'll get in big legal trouble. We start thinking about that, Zach, etc. Well, okay, then let's try to figure out how to reduce water consumption so we don't have these conflicts going forward. But it's just going to be really tough. And there's been thoughts, maybe we should just buy out people's water rights. The state just buy people's water rights out. That'd be incredibly expensive.
That much, it's probably not gonna last long.
Yeah. Yeah. Terry, do you have a question?
Well, on the topic of the bottoms, the Sierra Club taught me that as we drain the aquifer, then the rivers and the wet spots go down because they're being rooted on the aquifer. I mean, way down under there. So that's why rivers and bottoms, wetlands are going away. But I wasn't ready to leave transportation. Do you see any activity for road transportation around Kansas? Like, for example, I don't think there's a bus from Lawrence to Topeka. Am I wrong about that?
So you're saying other alternative transportation options. So Kansas passed the Ike plan, you know, which is kind of our latest round of funding our highways and transportation in the state. What was it, $10 billion over 10 years? And part of that in the fine print there is that there ought to be emphasis on public transportation options, alternative transportations, not just busing, but walkways and bike paths and all those things. So those are into it. I'm not sure that they got a sliver of the funding earmarked, but that's available through the $10 billion 10-year plan. And so communities could apply for those projects, is my understanding, work with the Department of Transportation, but I don't know if there's any specific earmark on all that. Senator?
Well, you're talking about inner city, not within a city.
Right, right.
So she's saying, how do we get from Kansas to Wichita?
Oh.
You may be able to do it on the Greyhound. Years and years ago, I didn't have a driver's license until I was 38. So I took the Greyhound bus between Lawrence and Kansas City, Kansas, where my dad was working. But so we just need to look at to see Greyhound, but sometimes the schedule isn't that helpful. And of course, then once you get to that bus station in the other community, is that connected? But Topeka has a pretty good bus system.
Well, it does that runner between here and Johnson County, Joe, that runs
Yeah.
multiple times a day.
But that's the community college.
Yeah,
But
still,
it's
I
great,
think,
you can use it.
yeah, but if they can do something, if they can do it for that, why can't they do it? Well, but once you get to the community college, you can get into the Kansas City.
Right.
Bus line, go anywhere in the Kansas area. So that's sort of,
Yeah,
I think they think that's, that,
Yeah.
Well, and so, but it was the community college that provided
pushed that,
the reasoning because Douglas County pays money.
Yep.
As part of it. So, but I like that idea.
Yeah, the state allowed me to commute to my job in Topeka using a private corporation again, GSBN. And so how come the state can't take that on? I mean, I can say, okay, here's commuter, you can pick up a commuter to this place, that place.
that's between a Democrat and a Republican. Republican believes the state should not, private corporations should pay for it. It's a very basic belief.
Well, I
Yeah.
understand that, but the
Yeah.
state is contracted with the
I don't want to interrupt the conversation too much. I do want to allow for people to talk amongst each other and just want to wrap up here. One, I need to remind myself and remind everybody here that in my view, there's equal opportunity, both Republican and Democrat, to do right by the environment. It shouldn't be a partisan issue. And so I try to, even though I've been maybe a little more frank with y'all here in Lawrence, you know, but I'd like to put that out there. And I work with Republicans, if not more than Democrats up there at the State House to try to get them to make environmental progress. Although, because I can depend on Democrats by and large to do the right thing. So I'll just say that. Then also, They listen to lobbyists. I provide accurate information, partnership, and constituent support. I'm not a lobbyist that brings a briefcase full of money. I just got ideas and people that really care, that I know, that are involved in our organizations at the local level and state level. But they listen to lobbyists in one ear, but probably more, they listen, theoretically, most of them do, I'd say, listen to constituents, okay? So it's really important to write your legislators. Help me out up there, please. Especially with this plastics issue. We got a hearing on Tuesday. It'll go past all that in terms of opportunity for you to send a message to not just either the committee or a senator, a Republican senator somewhere, but copy your own legislator on that so that they have a little bit of a receipt of your action. They know how you care. So keep talking with your representatives. Vote and all that stuff, that it goes without saying. But thank you for your interest. But make it known by helping talk to the legislators. So thank you very much. Thank you very much.